He used to be the executive editor of Daily Times, and you may also remember him for his famous The Other Columns that he used to write for the newspaper back then. He's also quite a known news talk show host, hosting shows on Dawn and Summer. He also used to be the Forbes Scholar at UICC and a fellow of Brookings, and is also a columnist for Express Tribune, Pakistan Today, and Indian Express. And today we will be talking about Pakistan's irregular war, winning or losing.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you also to the Pakistan Society at Oxford. You forgot to mention that you ate my house at one time. That will be part of it. I chose this topic for two reasons. One, I've traveled extensively through FATA in the last three and a half years. Before the military operations, during the military operations, and have tried to go back post-military operations as often as I possibly can. So this topic is fairly close to some of the work that I've been doing in the last 3 years. Also because I have a broader interest in the idea of war itself and how it impacts states and how states respond to it. When I was briefly in the army myself, we were never taught about irregular war, because the entire concept was about an interstate war, and in our case, in Pakistan, the focus obviously was India. So it was more sort of Clausewitzian in nature, in the sense that you had a defined frontier, you could identify the enemy clearly, and that was easy, frankly, because even though modern war is something in which the cities can be targeted, the fact is that the wars that we have fought with India, the zones of war and peace, have been fairly separate from each other in many ways. Most of the wars that we have fought have been closer to the old sort of Second World War style than a very modern war, except of course for the air operations. But even those air operations, both the sides always try to target the military targets rather than take on the soft targets, or actually bomb cities, like for instance the British Bomber Command did during the Second World War, the German cities, or the bombing of Tokyo and in the Pacific theater. So that was the kind of war that we always looked at. But the war that we are fighting now, and I have a problem because I'm deeply skeptical about the use of the word counterinsurgency. I prefer to call it irregular war. And within that broader category, I always consider that these operations are part of low-intensity conflict. Because even when the superior force, as in the case of Malakand, where we had Operation Rai-Rast, or South Waziristan, where we had Operation Rai-Nigar, or the operations in Bajor, going in and capturing territory, or getting physical possession of territory, in and of itself, does not mean that you have actually won. Which is why this whole idea of winning or losing with a question mark is very important. And it's the same kind of thing that's happening west of the Durand Line, where in many ways the US and NATO ISAF troops have not really been able to achieve their objectives, one, and in fact have now arrived at a situation where it is not even clear what the objective really is. So that is the basic problem of fighting this war. The other problem, of course, is that it is extremely difficult to identify the adversary. You can pack a punch as a superior force, but what the adversary does is that it does not give you the cheek on which you will land that punch. that is one of the most frustrating things that any superior military force can encounter. So let me just give you a brief background. When the Americans invaded Afghanistan and after the Tora Bora operation, that's where these people started coming into the tribal areas of Pakistan. And in April 2002, we decided that we were going to send in some troops. And the two places where we deployed the troops was one in the Khyber Agency. There's a place called Tira. It's a valley. And the other place was Shwaz in North Waziristan. These deployments were conducted through negotiations with the tribal elders, or the Mashran as they're called in the area. And there were small operations. It wasn't any sweeping operation. The space to deployment ratio was not in favor of the army. The idea was to base troops there and, if and when necessary, to do some snap actions or mopping up operations or just keep an eye on the movement of these foreigners or the Afghans. The actual conflict began in March 2003, and this is post two attacks on General Musharraf, which happened within a span of 2 weeks in December 2003. March 2004. So December 2003, these attacks happened. In March 2004, there was this operation which went drastically wrong. And at that time, there was this guy named Mohammed al-Wazir, because this is the Wazir area, and he actually inflicted pretty heavy losses on FC troops and also some of the army troops that were supporting the FC troops. And after that, there was an agreement, and that agreement did not last very long. Then Sheikh Mohammed was killed, and the entire thing went towards the Masouds, and you have Abdullah Masood, and then you have Baitullah Masood. It all then began with greater intensity. There were many small operations at that time, and also some big operations, like in Kalusha, there was another operation in Spengai Ragadai, which is in South Waziristan. But there was no comprehensive strategy. It was the army going in, trying to clear an area, getting killed, killing people, or as in the case of Spengai Ragadai, actually demolishing houses and markets and extracting a heavy price from the other side, which was pretty indiscriminate at one level. And it did not redound to the army's advantage. I've been working on this chapter for a book, and when I started researching that particular period, because that was the time when I wasn't traveling in the area, and I realized that it was almost scandalous because the target acquisition was being done by the Americans, and the helicopters that were being used were Pakistani, and the troops were also Pakistani. So they'll go and try and do an operation, come back. So there was no clear perspective on what it is that we want to do. Whether we want to make an agreement with these people, how can we get them to get rid of the foreigners who are going back and forth? How can we impress on these people that they are not supposed to cross the Durand line and go into Afghanistan and fight against the NATO ISAF troops? So there was a lot of confusion. And that confusion in many ways still persists. It's not that it's gone away, except that now what we have since the Malakand operation is a strategy where the army has decided that at the minimum it is going to go in and get hold of the territory. So this is the physical control. But whether this physical control can actually translate into the psychological dominance of the area in order for the army to get the people back and resettle them and make them accept the fact that they are not going to support the insurgents in any way, whether in ideological terms or whether through coercion. The success is a mixed bag there. For instance, in Malakand, the army has largely succeeded in terms of not just clearing the area and holding it, but also building it. Of course, the building process still leaves much to be desired, but in relative terms, it has been far more successful in Malakand in terms of the third build phase than it has been, for instance, in Bajor or in South Waziristan or in Khyber or in Kuram. But just to give you an idea, actually, I wanted to share some through the slide. So we are talking about a border which is 1,360 kilometers from the Mantaka Pass in the north to Jo. This is where the NWFP has the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as it is called. And then you have another 1,200 kilometers, which is Balochistan, right up to Rabat. And just to give you an idea, I don't know if you can see this, of how difficult this border is. These are the heights that you have to monitor. This is the terrain which you have as far as the border between Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Afghanistan is concerned, and then you have another 1,200 kilometers, which is like this. It's much flatter compared to that terrain, but no less difficult. The real problem is that the people of this region, historically, have never accepted the Durand line. I was recently in Chaman, and there is a proper gate which identifies the territory of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I was talking to the Afghan guards there. And I told them, I said, I won't just go across to Vesh Mandi and Spin Boldak, which are the towns next to the border. And after a bit of back and forth, they allowed me to go in. So I crossed over into Afghanistan without a passport, without any visa, without any permit. I roamed around in Vesh Mandi and Spin Boldak. I went into a shop and asked this guy if he's from Vesh Mandi, and he said, no, I'm a Pakistani. I live in Chaman. So, but you have your shop in Vesh Mandi, which is in Afghanistan. So he says, I have this shop there for the last 30 years. And so he goes to Vesh Mandi during the day. He does his business, and then in the evening comes back to Chaman, back to his home. And we have these small boys who constantly go back and forth. And there are any number of items which are smuggled across. And when I try to argue with them that you have an international border here, and they looked at me as if I was a Martian or something, who was talking about a concept which is completely alien to them. Now, of course, one can turn that to the advantage of Pakistan and Afghanistan, but under different circumstances. But currently, there is a problem. Now, the interesting thing is that during Musharraf's time, there was a proposal by the Pakistan government that they will fence the border in certain areas, and they're also going to mine the border at certain areas. I had supported that proposal. The Canadians went through the roof because, being the international do-gooders, they said, how can you mine the border? We are not signatories to the landmine ban treaty. Neither are the Americans or the Indians. But anyway, we pulled back from that idea of mining the border. And for fencing, we were asking for funding.